Good morning, everyone. We're in 2 Samuel 17. So trying to look at how things are timing with the number of weeks I have left. I think we probably are going to just about finish up 2 Samuel by the time that I leave. So it looks like that's probably our countdown. That assumes I can keep moving, which I want to keep moving on this, so that we, so that I can finish the book with y'all for sure. So we're going to try to keep this moving a little bit. We've got time for about a chapter a week, which should be no problem. So 2 Samuel 17, remember we are in the narrative of Absalom's rebellion because of David's inaction toward Absalom and the whole chain of events that happened prior to that. We see Absalom rebelling against his father and naming himself king over all Israel. And so far, he seems to be pretty successful. His scheme has worked. David has fled in some amount of dishonor and fear, knowing that he has a lot of people against him. We talked last week about how Shimei was, dishonoring him and cursing him and all of those things. The fact that people feel safe to do that to the person who very recently was ruling there in Jerusalem is not a good sign for David. And of course, many people were mourning that David was leaving Jerusalem as well. The whole nation had not turned against him, but it seems like a very large number had, and so this becomes a difficult situation for him. Well, just as quickly as David leaves Jerusalem, Absalom arrives, so they really did leave at a good time. And Ahithophel has flipped to Absalom's side. He was a well-trusted advisor, and now he is advising Absalom. The first thing he advised Absalom to do was to publicly make a show of taking David's concubines for himself, which was certainly going to sever any remaining loyalty between the two of them, if there was any. That would be very obvious in people's minds. And then also show his power over the situation, that he's able to do such a thing without consequences. That brings us to chapter 17. And we see Ahithophel offering some more advice, but this time it's going to be contested. There's going to be two competing advice given, and so let's talk about those. What does Ahithophel advise Absalom to do about David? Gary. Yeah. Dave. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So looking for a surgical strike here, and the idea behind Ahithophel's advice is let's do it quickly. Let's not let David get too far away. Let's not give him time to assemble any forces or to kind of get any rest. Let's end this almost before it's started. And if we just kill David, what's the benefit of just killing David? Gary started to talk about it, but yeah, Dave?
Well, I think the thinking was get rid of David and all the men will come flocking back to us.
Yeah. Keep this as bloodless a revolution as possible. Everyone will flip over to Absalom's side when David is dead. There's no point in showing any loyalty toward him anymore. And then Absalom can be magnanimous and say, hey, don't worry, I'm pardoning everyone who had loyalty to David before. Just come to me and I will be your king, and then he gets to look really good in their eyes, and there's a strong benefit there. Okay.
Well, Ahithophel wanted to lead 12,000 men. He wanted to do it. It's like he wanted to kill David. He must have been very upset with it. But that kind of left Absalom completely out. He wanted to do it.
Yeah. So there's an interesting point there that Ahithophel is saying he will lead the soldiers to go and attack David, which is interesting. You would think that might not be Ahithophel's normal role, although maybe he did do such a thing from time to time. But yeah, that might have been something that Absalom picked up on and became part of how Ahithophel's advice was defeated, though he still could have pushed back on that and said, we'll do your plan, but I'll lead them. It is an interesting note, though, for sure. Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, just a couple chapters before, David prayed that Ahithophel's advice would be foolish.
Yeah.
And stuff like that, which, this is, because, he's given advice to go out, take 12,000 men and face David and kill him and stuff like that. And the people will come back to him and stuff. But, if you think back, David's been chased before. And he's had his mighty men with him before and stuff. And they did not abandon him, and stuff. They actually, they went and fought, just to get him a drink of water.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of foolish to say that he's saying.
I don't think it would be as easy as Ahithophel is necessarily making it out to be, that we just go in, kill David, and it's all over. Maybe, people get put in difficult situations, and if David really is dead, then, maybe everyone is going to flip. I think what we'll see is, we'll talk about Hushai's advice in just a moment. Hushai's advice is designed not to work, and it doesn't work. And so then the implication is maybe Ahithophel's advice would have, or was the better advice. God can defeat either one, of course. If God's going to be with David, it doesn't really matter who's giving the advice and who is listened to. God can give David the victory. But the way that it's done here is it's set up like Ahithophel's advice is maybe the better advice, but it's not going to be heeded, though I still do agree that I don't think it's quite as simple as he's making it out to be here, that it might be a little optimistic. Dave?
I don't know if anyone noticed this, what was said here, but Ahithophel.
Yeah, sure.
He referred, he said, I will strike only the king.
Yeah.
He called David the king, and I'm surprised Absalom catch up on him, because he considered himself the king.
Right.
You'd think he would correct him about something, I don't know, it's kind of weird, I read that, that's kind of strange.
Yeah.
Why did he call him the king?
It is a little bit strange, and I don't think Ahithophel's playing any game. He's completely gone over to Absalom's side, but maybe it's these little indiscretions in wording that make Absalom reject it. We see that God is going to defeat Ahithophel's advice, and maybe it's certain indiscretions like that that is the mechanism that God uses. Which would be out of character for Ahithophel. Maybe it's not even interpreted that way. Maybe he means, the previous king, and that's understood. Regardless, what's the first reaction to this advice?
Please, Absalom.
Yeah, it sounds like a good plan. Like there's some reason to this, and it sounds like a pretty decent plan. And let's put this in the context as well that Ahithophel is someone who has been trusted for a long time. So when a trusted advisor gives you his advice, well, generally speaking, you're going to be pleased with what he says and think that that's a good idea. He's proven himself many times before. So Absalom and the rest of the court there, the leaders of Israel, they all think that this is a great idea, and it seems like that is probably what's going to happen if Hushai doesn't step in.
It's sad
Yeah,
I mean, this is all power.
yeah.
You know, he thinks it's a great idea.
Yeah, that's a good dose of sanity to bring back into this. That, what does this mean? Absalom's rebellion is, disloyal, obviously, to the king of Israel and displeasing to God for that reason, but also, disloyal to his own father and not honoring him as they were supposed to honor their parents. Surely rebelling against him and trying to kill him does not meet that bar in any way. So it's a shameful thing that's happening here. And it's shameful for David to have his son so publicly resist him and try to kill him. That would bring any parent to shame if their child were so maliciously set against them. And I bring that up because we're going to notice David's state of mind throughout this whole occasion. As we've been pointing out, he's been a bit downtrodden already in thinking that maybe this is God's judgment against him, maybe that he is going to lose the kingdom entirely and Absalom is going to have the upper hand. That idea is going to get worse as time goes on with David's general mood. So, Ahithophel's advice sounds really good. What does Hushai step in and advise Absalom to do instead? Aaron.
Basically, it's bring all of your force and gather a large group of people and then go get David and his men.
Okay.
So, Ahithophel's let's strike quickly before he can, kind of gain his footing and gather support. And Hushai's, wait, let's consolidate forces and show up with a large group.
Yeah. You can see, the pros and cons of both of those, right? Ahithophel says, I can get 12,000 men quickly. We can go take care of this right now. It's all over. And that makes it the simplest possible. Hushai says, what if that fails? What if we lose? That's going to be quite a blow to you right away. So no need to rush. We can get a lot more than 12,000 men if we take our time and gather them together, get a real fighting force together, and then go and attack David. And then surely we will be successful because there's no way that David can gather as many men as we can. Dave?
Well, he also says something else. He says that he's probably in some pits somewhere. He doesn't sleep with the men. He's off by himself. You're not going to find him
Yeah.
like that. So that's important because you walk in there with an army to kill David or be by yourself to kill David. You can even look around for 6 to 8 hours. I mean, you don't know where he is. No one's going to tell you where he is.
Right.
So it's interesting that he brings that up. He did that obviously to dissuade Absalom from listening to
Yeah.
So that's kind of important because, it's a waste of time. And it's true. David would not be sleeping out with the men.
Yeah. And so then, if you have trouble finding David, then, it's easier for you to get ambushed by the soldiers who have now noticed that you've come. And then, even if you've got 12,000 men, well, now they've fallen. Now the very first thing that's happened for Absalom being king is an embarrassing loss in a fight against the previous king. That's not a good look for him. That's going to destabilize things. Hushai says, I know the temptation is great to go and just strike, but you can't afford to lose. So let's get everyone together and let's make sure that this gets done properly. Okay?
But he also tells Absalom to lead this force.
Yeah.
And this would appeal to his ego.
Yes.
He is the leader and not Ahithophel.
Right. Yeah. So Hushai is smart here in that he is able to appeal to Absalom. I know what's going to be convincing to him. Remember, in case you forgot, Hushai is David's friend and David's spy. So he is trying to give advice that will be appealing and convincing to Absalom, but is actually going to give David some time in order to gather himself and to be able to resist an attack. So we can understand from this that Hushai sees danger in Ahithophel's advice. Hushai did not try to defeat the advice of Ahithophel in taking the concubines, because that did not pose an immediate threat to David. That is embarrassing and dishonorable and a lot of things, but it's not a threat to David's life. And so Hushai can stand back and let that happen. But he sees danger in what Ahithophel is advising Absalom to do, because, remember, he was just with David. He knows they're scrambling. So he knows that even if maybe it's not going to be as simple as Ahithophel is arguing that it will be, that this is too dangerous to allow Ahithophel to lead 12,000 men to go attack David immediately. We need to give David some time. So ultimately, Hushai's advice is bad advice that is meant to sound like good advice. Just kind of understand that as we go. Aaron?
Yeah, and verse 14 says that Ahithophel gave good counsel,
Yeah.
and that it was good
Yeah. So,
for Absalom to be
right.
victorious.
Yes. So as messy as the whole situation is, and I think what we've identified in this is both of them sound halfway reasonable. Neither is a completely absurd thing to say. Both are things that you can defend and are meant to be appealing to Absalom. But in this case, Hushai knows that the one with the higher success rate is Ahithophel's advice, because he's not a dummy. And it is called good counsel here, but Hushai, wants to subvert that and undermine that, and God is working to make that happen. God is working through Hushai here to defeat Ahithophel's good advice and to instead have Absalom listen to Hushai. Gary?
That's what I was gonna say, clearly, the bottom line is, the Lord purposed
Yes.
to defeat Ahithophel's.
Yes.
So that really clears it up.
Yeah, exactly. That we see what's happening here. This also gives us a lesson in the way that one of the ways that God can work in people's lives. That when God purposes to do something, that he can work through the words of another person, through the actions of another person. There are lots of ways that God could give victory to David here. He could have let Absalom, go into battle against David, listening to Ahithophel's advice, and just give David the victory. That would not be the first time that God gave David a military victory when the odds were stacked against him. We know that's not a problem. In this case, God doesn't let that happen. He gives David some more time, for whatever reason God has to give David some more time, and uses the words of Hushai to defeat Ahithophel's advice. So, interesting to see the actions of God there. So, I've sort of jumped ahead with this question here, but we see that while initially Ahithophel's advice was favored and everyone liked that, once Hushai made his case, everyone swung over to him and said, no, that's even better, let's listen to him. And so Absalom and his advisors all agree, let's wait, let's assemble our forces, let's have one grand battle, and we will defeat David and anyone loyal to him and secure Absalom's place on the throne. So Hushai sends a message to David, letting him know that this is what's going to happen. He does this through Zadok and Abiathar, and they send Zadok's sons. There's a little bit of drama as they almost get found, and so they're hiding, and then they manage to get to David and say, you've got a little bit of time, but you got to get ready, because there's going to be a large army coming against you, and a fight is brewing. And so David who had made it to the Jordan River, decides to cross the Jordan to get to a more fortified place so that he can kind of gather himself and his men and prepare for this battle. So why does Ahithophel hang himself when his advice is not taken? Gary?
I think one thing, it shows a man that had a lot of pride, like a sinful pride. Could
Ye-
not accept any kind of mistake or that his perfect advice not taken.
Yeah, so, I think that's one way to look at that here, and because it seems like such an extreme reaction to, is this the first time that an advisor doesn't have his advice taken? He was pretty popular, and he was highly regarded, so maybe it had been a long time since he had been ignored. Still, though, it is a little hard to fathom why it resorts to not just going off and sulking, not just going off and throwing a fit, or just abandoning Absalom and going to join the some other people, but instead killing himself. Jeff?
Well, I don't think it says, why he killed himself, but, another speculation could be that, he realized that his counsel was not followed, so, hey, David's gonna be victorious, he's gonna hear that I was against him, and, he's gonna have me put to death.
I think that's probably the right answer there. That's the way that I see it. And that's not to invalidate the point that Ahithophel might have had his feelings hurt over this and his pride wounded by not being listened to. I don't think that was something that happened a whole lot to him. But there's another layer to this that he is able to see that David is going to be victorious. That because Absalom did not listen to his advice and instead is listening to Hushai, that David will be victorious, he will regain the throne. And then what's going to happen to Ahithophel? You get to say, sorry, bro, that didn't mean to do that. No, you don't get to do that. Only death awaits a traitor. And in fact, we see that the way Absalom ends up dying is in a very dishonorable and kind of torturous way. And that's probably what awaits Ahithophel if David really is victorious. Now, might we imagine that he could wait to see if David actually were victorious? Yeah, I mean, that's what makes me think that either he is very, very sure that Hushai's advice is bad, or that it's a combination of the two things, of his wounded pride and shame, and seeing that David's going to regain the throne. But the whole thing's become a mess, really. Gary?
I would just ask if that was the right thing to do.
To kill himself? No, I mean, it's not. It's not good for him to kill himself. He is probably trying to save himself a worse death that he would have to face. But no, the Bible's never put a good spin on suicide in any form, though there are several accounts of people being quite desperate like that. Dave?
Well, it's pretty clear in Exodus 20, we're not supposed to commit suicide.
Yeah.
It's
So,
cowardice when you do that.
yeah,
The interesting thing to me, what he could have, there were options for this guy.
sure.
He
Yeah.
could have defected over to David, he could have left, took off somewhere. The odd thing to me was he went home, he put his house in order.
Yeah.
And then,
So, it's actually something, sorry, go ahead.
to kill himself. Why wouldn't he just do it? I mean,
Yeah.
there's no mention of Judas doing that.
Yeah.
He just hung himself. It's puzzling to me that he would put his house in order. Very odd.
So it's actually something that psychologists identify today too, that people who are likely to commit suicide or who have active plans to commit suicide very often do put things in order ahead of time, and it is counterintuitive. You would think that if you're in such a state of despair, you don't care about anything, but very often there's that desire to kind of fix what I can fix, to kind of give away my belongings or get things in order for people before I leave, and then I have that, that knowledge as I die that I was able to set some things in order. It does sound a little counterintuitive, but it is still something that is identified today. And I guess what he is doing is trying to still do something for his family and the people who rely on him, even though he sees a lot of harm coming. You have to imagine, though, that his family is going to be at risk too. So there's just kind of a messy situation all around. Lisa? Right, yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's yeah. Yeah. Right. It's definitely an awkward situation. It's an awkward situation that Ahithophel created for himself when he defected. And that's something that a lot of times we miss when we get into these sticky situations and we say, well, now I have no choice but to, do whatever, to sin in some further way or to kill myself or whatever, when very often it's our choices that have led us down that path. And Ahithophel, might be executed for what he has done, and maybe that's even what he deserves, but that's the bed he's made, so that's what he's got to lie in. Jeff?
Well, it's sad, we can see that this is more cardinal or because he's thinking about things in this life instead of eternal life.
Yeah.
What's going to happen spiritually or what's going to happen physically. He doesn't think that.
Yeah.
Spiritual, he's thinking about the world.
Right, definitely. Mark?
Yeah, I think all those things come into play, parts of the story that we don't know about, including the fact that David probably wouldn't have killed him coming back because, there's a relation with Bathsheba.
Right.
Why would you do that?
Yeah.
And there's just so many components about it that we don't know about.
Yeah.
But it's not unusual for a warrior to rather die a noble death
Yeah.
than die by the hands of somebody that would bring shame to your death.
Yeah.
You see that practice in Asian cultures and things like that. And even Saul, telling his armor bearer, run me through, which is
Yeah.
essentially a type of suicide.
Right.
And falling on his own sword. It's just what they did. It was a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And I just find it fascinating. Uriah was a noble soldier. He was well known in the Jewish tradition. He was a masterful warrior, and he carried a lot of clout. That's why he lived near the king.
Yeah.
And so we have to know that Ahithophel was so glad that his daughter was married to or granddaughter was married to this great warrior.
Yeah.
And David took that away. And there's all these things about that story that we have no idea, but that were going on in the hearts and minds of these people at that time.
Yeah. It all sounds messy because it was. These situations, of course, are messy. That's a good observation you made about that cultural practice and that thought of, dying an honorable death rather than letting someone else kill you. Of course, it's not really an accurate way to look at it, right? Like, the Bible does not ascribe honor to, choosing your method of death or bringing death upon yourself. That's something that man has created in their own minds of trying to, or really having a warped understanding of life and death and of whose job and whose right it is to be able to take someone's life away. In fact, God puts quite a high value on life, and it's never something that is taken away lightly. Even in the cases where there is, justified killing, like, executions and even in war and things like that, which is at least sometimes justified, even according to God. It still is never something that is done lightly. It's always a heavy thing. Even the execution of a notorious criminal is a heavy thing. It's never something that's made light of in the Bible or by God. And so this concept that choosing your method of death or your time of death brings a kind of honor upon you is actually a very dangerous one. And I want to emphasize that because it's not just the Japanese pilots that are what did they call it? The kamikaze pilots, right? We look at that and we go, man, why would they do such a thing? They find honor in that, or they did. I don't know if that's still a thing anymore. But that concept comes in subtler ways as well. So just in Canada here, now they've got, euthanasia-assisted suicide that you can go and get from your doctor. And they're running commercials on TV about how good it is to be able to bring yourself to peace and to choose your time that you die. Really horrible things that destroy the sanctity of life. We are degrading the sanctity of life step by step in a lot of different ways. It's not just abortion. It's not just murder. It's a lot of things as we devalue people and devalue their lives. Lisa?
Paul, everything that he went through, I'm sure, stark period of depression.
Yeah.
He used to be living with some kind of painful situation physically. And he said, even though it's better to be with the Lord, he knew that he had to keep going until the Lord made that decision to take him. Better to be with Christ, and he still had work to do, and didn't think it proper to choose his own life.
Right.
Situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good observation you made about the possible motives there at the Ahithophel, and also important for us to remember that that's actually kind of a toxic way to look at it, and not something that should be glamorized in the way that many cultures often do. Aaron?
Yeah, we like to be in control.
We do.
We like to take action,
Yeah.
and that's attractive to us. When really what God has asked us to do is to submit
Yeah.
and to trust, put our trust and faith in Him, which is what David is doing. He's kind of leading it up to God. He's taking action, but he's not, making the determination of
Yeah.
God's judgment.
Right.
So what Ahithophel is doing is taking action and making his own determination,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
rather than trusting in the Lord and maybe the grace of faith.
Yeah.
So it requires a lot of trust and faith to do the righteous thing.
Right. And the anxiety of that would be a lot to bear, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to do there. Let's look at chapter 18. Kind of in the transition from 17 to 18, we see that David crosses the Jordan. He's getting himself fortified. But just as soon as he crosses the Jordan, Absalom is crossing after him. So even though they are waiting a little bit to assemble more forces, still this is happening pretty quickly, which I think lends credence to the idea that if Ahithophel's advice had been taken and they set off after David immediately, they would have caught up to him while David was still scrambling. Maybe while David is still doing things like figuring out who's loyal to him and getting his men some rest and trying to find food and trying to, all of these things, those meetings he was having with people, maybe Absalom would have been there then, and that would have been very difficult for him. Surely we see that there is not a whole lot of time passing here, that everything is happening very quickly, even though Hushai is trying to delay, because David has not had a whole lot of time across the river before Absalom is right there on his heels. And so, how does David arrange his army for the battle that's about to happen? Jeff?
Well, he sets up captains of hundreds and thousands, so there's different levels of leadership, but he said he divided his army up into three groups and put a guy over each group.
Yeah. Okay. So you got the the assembly together and some structure and organization. They need to not just be a disorganized mass of people on the run, but an army that is ready to fight. Who are the three leaders kind of over the larger battalions? Okay, so Joab's one. That's a fairly obvious choice, and one we've seen before. Joab is a commander of David's armies. He has been in the picture every time that there's a war, so not a surprise that Joab would be there. Who else?
Joab's brother.
Joab's brother Abishai. Okay, another great choice, been loyal a long time. And who's the third one?
Ittai, the Gittite?
Yeah, who's he?
The Gittite.
Yeah. Yes. Do we remember where else we've seen him? I know it's hard to keep track of these names.
And didn't he just arrive? David told him he didn't have to go with him?
Yeah, that's the same guy. He's the one. Remember when David was leaving and he's assessing the loyalty of his men, he picks the newest soldier there and says, "You just joined. You can go. You don't have this obligation to me. This is more than you signed up for, basically." And Ittai said, "No, I pledge my loyalty to you. Nothing has changed for me." And that kind of rallies everyone to go along with what the newest recruit is doing, and they all are going to be loyal to David. Well, it seems like there almost must be a little more to this story, because Ittai is put as one of these three leaders, and as the newest recruit. That seems kind of baffling to me, but clearly people are rallying behind this Ittai. His example is showing him to be a good leader, and we don't read of any pushback to that at all, so I guess that's working just fine. David's not a fool. So I don't think he would do that if it were, a terrible idea.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, we don't know if he's already had a reputation of a mighty warrior or something like that who aligned himself with David.
Probably he did, yeah.
Coming in like a private or something like that,
Yeah.
and working his way up the ranks.
Yeah.
I see him as somebody who's coming in as already, like I said, he's an established person who wants to join David's side.
Yeah, so that's a good point. And no, I don't think that he's a brand new soldier in the sense that he's never fought before. That seems very, very unlikely. David is assembling these people specifically to have an experienced fighting force to be his bodyguard. That's who they've been. So yeah, Ittai surely has battle experience and is more than some wet behind the ears new recruit that way. So maybe recruit is a bad word that I used before. But even still, as the newest person in the group, there's still a little bit of surprise there for me that regardless of his experience, that's a pretty quick escalation to a position of power. But hey, good for him.
Yeah, we don't know how many people came with him when
Yeah.
he joined David.
Right.
He brought his own band of
Yeah.
soldiers.
That's a good point too. Yeah, he may already be, positioned as a leader for that. Lots we don't know. Lots that's ultimately not terribly important. I just thought that it was an interesting note that we see him there, and so David clearly believes in his loyalty. Okay, so why does David not go into battle? Dave?
Well, that's just me, in my opinion. It's possible
Yeah, we see clearly that David wants to go into battle. He's trying to go into battle. Ultimately, he doesn't. Jeff?
Yeah, the people did not want him to go because they knew that Absalom was after David.
Yeah.
Not after them. You know, so if something happens to them, it's like, hey, no problem. If something happens to you, there's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, if David dies, it's all over. You know, if 1,000 soldiers die, we still might be in it. And that's basically what they're saying. You know, you're worth thousands of us. But if you die, it's all over. And really, it's not good for any of us. We're all likely to be rounded up and killed or enslaved or something if you die. So there's a very practical reason, but also their loyalty to him, saying, you're the main target, let's keep you safe, and we'll work to bring victory.
Along with what you said, if David wasn't with them, then they would fall off, because it wasn't, they were going to keep fighting for something that wasn't there.
Yeah.
But if David was there, he would cut through everybody to get them.
Yeah.
So on their behalf, rather than have them fight so fiercely, they just, blow through these people.
Yeah.
Get to David and getting supplies. So on their own behalf and on behalf.
Yeah, there's very practical reasons for this. It's even more than normal. The goal here is to, kill the king. Aaron?
Yeah, I think Lisa's spot on. They can't concentrate their attack if David isn't on the battlefield.
Yeah.
They have to fight everyone.
Yeah.
And the battle is against the army.
Yeah.
If David's there, they can concentrate
Yeah.
and plan their attack and coordinate that such
Right.
that they get to him.
Yes.
So in effect, they are giving themselves a better, opportunity. They're spreading the forces out.
Yep. It's smart. On many levels, it's smart. If there was any reason for us to question or condemn David for not being in battle during the incident with Bathsheba, which we talked about that, then, maybe not. At least there was opportunity for sin there. There's no problem here. Like, clearly it's the best course of action. It's what all of his men are telling him to do. We can see, even pretty easily from our perspective, yeah, it's better, David, if you are not here in the battle with us. Dave?
I'm sorry, I only answered half the question on that. I should have-
No, it's okay. I only asked half the question when I, yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if anybody brought this up, but I can.
Yeah.
Is it possible he didn't want to go and he didn't have to face Absalom? And because later he says, he'll come to you, or he'll come to you with him, or kick us. He said, he'll gently, for my sake.
Yeah. Maybe. I mean, we don't see any hesitation on him, from him going into battle. We certainly see hesitation from him in, wanting, or in what he wants to happen to Absalom. Like, he doesn't want Absalom killed, which is, probably a hard thing to defend from a military perspective.
Worse than that, maybe, because having to be in battle, I'm going to have to kill my son.
Yeah.
It would be a horrendous choice.
Oh, yeah. Sure. And he knows it might come down to actual, hand-to-hand combat between them two. Absalom's going to do everything he can to get to David. So, yeah, there's reason there that he might not want to actually be fighting against Absalom.
Yeah, it was mentioned before that, if the king was there, if David was there, they would fight straight to him. But, they said here that, hey, if we have to retreat, we can retreat, there's no problem.
Yeah.
But if you're here, we can't, we gotta stay here
Yeah.
and defend you.
Right. It's the logical course of action, and David sees reason with it. He knows it's best for him not to be there. And so they're all going to prepare themselves, and a battle is brewing, which we'll talk about next week. So we'll talk about the outcome of the battle, how Absalom dies, David's response, and then try to get into chapter 19 as well. Thank you.